Good morning to those of you who are joining us from Washington. Good afternoon to several of our panelists. Good evening to one of those who will be joining us from other parts of the world. I'm Suzanne Maloney. I'm Vice President and Director of Foreign Policy here at the Brookings Institution, and I'm delighted to welcome you all to our discussion today on the protests underway currently in Iran. Earlier this month, 22-year-old Masa Amini was arrested apparently for concerns about her Hijab by Iran's morality police. She died in custody, and as we've witnessed, her death has sparked protests across Iran in one of the largest displays of defiance of the regime in recent years. Women have been burning their headscarves in the streets in public displays of protests, and we know at least several demonstrators have died as the unrest has been met with a fierce crackdown by the regime. These protests come at a time where there have been questions about the health of Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, and while Iran's president, Ibrahim Raisi, is currently in New York attending the United Nations General Assembly meetings. The case of Masa Amini has drawn widespread international attention. Acting UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Nada al-Nashif, has stated Masa Amini's tragic death and allegations of torture and ill treatment must be promptly, impartially, and effectively investigated by an independent, competent authority that ensures in particular that her family has access to justice and truth. With all of these developments currently unfolding, I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to come together and take stock of events. I'm joined today by three panelists who will be discussing this from the perspective of those who know Iran best. Today, we have with us Maziar Bahari, who is the founder of IranWire, a groundbreaking journalist and the author of Then They Came For Me, which was the basis of the 2014 film Rosewater, directed by Jon Stewart. We're also joined today by Aida Ghajar, who is a journalist with IranWire. She was among the first to report on the death of Masa Amini and bring this story to the wider world. We're also joined by phone by Professor Dr. Sadek Zibakalam, who is an Iranian academic, author, and a pundit. He teaches at the University of Tehran. He often appears on news outlets within Iran and all around the world. And he has written a number of books, including How Did We Become Who We Are? And An Introduction to the Islamic Revolution. Both of those are bestsellers. We apologize that we're unable to bring Dr. Zibakalam to you via video, but we're really thrilled that he's been able to join us on the telephone today to give us a firsthand perspective of what's happening on the streets across Iran today. I'm going to turn the mic over to my colleague, Maziar Bahari, who will be conversing with Dr. Zibakalam. And then both Maziar and Aida will give us a perspective from their own reporting of the events that led up to the current protests and what this may all mean for Iran.
Thank you very much, Susan. And thank you so much for organizing this event in such a hectic time. I know that during United Nations General Assembly, all the think tanks and everyone in the US is quite busy, but we are thrilled to have great panelists, my dear colleague, Aida, who is in Paris, and she will join us. But I would like to start with Dr. Zibakalam because he's on the phone. He's on my speakerphone, as you can see, and I hope that we're not going to lose Dr. Zibakalam. As you know, the internet bandwidth in the past few days have been narrowed severely in Iran. So it's very difficult for our colleagues in Iran, our friends in Iran, to be able to use even the simplest of the softwares like WhatsApp or Telegram. But we are delighted to be able to talk to Dr. Zibakalam in Tehran via landline. I guess you always can rely on the old technology. So I think with Dr. Zibakalam, I would like to ask you, what is happening in Iran? What do you see when you look out the window, when you go to the streets? What's going on?
Let me begin by apologizing for not being able to attend our discussion, our panel properly, because since 2 days ago there have been a virtual shutdown of internet, or it is very difficult and unreliable to use internet. So I really couldn't be with you through the internet. Let me also say that what has happened has surprised, astonished, even opponent of the government. Not only the authorities, but even ordinary Iranian citizens are quite astonished as the widespread uprising throughout Iranian cities. When it began 4 nights ago, we all thought that, or at least I thought that, well, that would be few hours and it would be only in Saqqez, the city that Gina came from, the Kurdish girl that was killed by the police, by the ethic police or whatever its name is.
Morality
we
police.
all thought that, yeah, morality police. Thank you, Maziar. And it would be it. Tomorrow everything would be back to normal. But then what happened tomorrow? Instead of being normal, we witness widespread unrest in other the Kurdish cities. Then it came to Tehran, then it went to Tabriz, then it went to Hamadan, then it went to Mashhad, then it went to the places that surprised even further. It went to Qom, the heart of the Islamic establishment. Now, everyone is feeling that this is something completely different from what we have experienced after the unrest 4 years ago, which many Iranians were killed. The whole thing, actually, there was a price uprising of petrol, and there was 1 or 2 night street protests. The government says that at that time, nearly 300 people were killed. Others put the number at 1,500. But the whole thing finished in 2 to 3 days. It is quite unprecedented because it has lasted so far. Point number 2 is the government reaction. The government simply is using the tactic, using the explanation that they have always used, that this is the work of the royalists, this is the work of the Mujahideen, this is the Americans and other counter-revolutionary who are using, or rather misusing, the death of this Kurdish girl, and they are more or less saying what they have always maintained, which is it's a conspiracy by the enemies of the state. More or less, the ideas that is used by Putin and other authoritarian regime. They haven't said a word of which says that we can understand, which would mean that we can understand the anger of our people. We have sympathy with them. Maybe some of the tactics have been harsh. None of these. And some of the leaders, some of the Iranian leaders, they are talking as though nothing is happening. I mean, that is really very strange.
So what do you think is different between these protests and the previous ones, like in 2018 and 2017? What is the difference?
There are a couple of points which is a radical departure from previous protests. Point number one, as I mentioned, point number one is the fact that it's so widespread. Previous protests were mainly in principal cities, large cities such as Tehran, Isfahan, Shiraz, Rasht, etc. But there are reports that even small towns and cities, people have come out onto the street. That's point number one. Point number two, the degree of participation of youth, most of them in their teens, the 18-year-old, 19-year-old, 20-year-old, 15-year-old, most of them are actually younger Iranian generation. Point number three is the leading part which Iranian girls are playing. They're so courageous, so brave, that it is really remarkable. And they are in fact, though they are pushing everyone that why don't you come out, why don't you come out, they are acting in such a way. They are wearing their scarf, they are saying no to hijab, and so on and so forth. That's
so speaking of Iranian women, let's hear from an Iranian woman now. So Aida, when you heard when you reported last Wednesday, I remember I was shocked by your reporting when you reported for the first time that a woman named Masa was beaten by the morality police and she was in coma. Did you expect such demonstrations to happen? And if not, why do you think these demonstrations has happened? And why do you think these demonstrations and these protests are different from the other ones, and what's the role of women in them?
Hello to everyone, and thank you for having this session, this webinar. About your question, Mr. Bahari, first of all, I agree with Mr. Ziba Kalam about the leadership in the role of women on this protests, but they're not just leading these protests. They are there's a difference that they took off their hijab. They went face to face with the police, not just the morality police, all the police that they are on the street for ending this protest, and they are fully armed. But these women, this girl, young women, they have nothing, and they are just there with their voices. So when I saw the unconfirmed news on the 13th September, it was mentioned on Twitter that there's a girl who was arrested by the morality police, and she is on hospital. We didn't have any name. We didn't have any confirmation about this news, but we started searching. I contacted my contacts on Iran, and with my dearest colleague on IranWire, Shima Shahrabi, we start searching, contacting the others inside of Iran, and then suddenly we found out that this is truth, and this is the truth. And Masa, the name of this girl is Masa, and when she arrested, her brother was with her. Masa was at Tehran, capital of Iran, as a tourist, and such an ordinary girl went outside on the street, and then stopped by the morality police, and then they arrested her. They told Masa's brother that Masa gonna be at this detention center named Rosewater for just 1 hour. He should has some training lesson how to wear the hijab, and then they're gonna liberate Masa. But her brother
educated in Islamic moralities.
Yes, thank you. Yes, exactly. And her brother went to the detention center, waiting for liberated her outside this detention center. And then less than 2 hours, there was an ambulance who went out from Rosewater detention center, and Masa's brother asking the police officer who was at the ambulance what happened there, but a police officer lied to him and said there's another officer, nothing important, as Mr. Raisi said on the UN, that there's not such important news killing Masa. But we found her brother, we talked to him, and he told us all the story. And he asked us to being their voice, being Masa's voice around the world. So Masa was at coma. At the first thing that we had was we hoped Masa gonna survive it. But unfortunately, after 3 days on coma, the doctor announced that she has been died. Two latest news that maybe I can give you now. The first is about their family. Yesterday, I and in IranWire, we had an interview with a member of Masa's family, and they told us the family of Masa, they are under pressure for being front of the camera of the Iranian government media, and confessing by force that Masa was sick before. But until now, they deny that, and they said that they didn't accept this scenario. This is a known scenario from Iranian government. Always they did that, and they resist them. The family, Masa's family, resistance for accepting this lie. And another thing that I can confirm here today, there was a pressure on the Iranian media and Iranian journalists inside of Iran. We have a one journalist, Nilufar Hamedi, who was arrested, and her lawyer announced this news on the Twitter and social media. But we have until now two other journalists that we can't say their names, but they are arrested inside of Iran. And intelligence service, they called Iranian journalists, and they told they should stay at home and not going outside of their home. If they move from their home, they're gonna arrest it. Another things that the intelligence service, they called the responsible of some of the journals, some of the newspaper on Iran, and they told them they shouldn't publish any other news about the protest and about Masa's family.
Thanks, Aida. And I believe when you spoke with the cousin of Masa yesterday, the conspiracy theory goes beyond her being ill when she was a child, because this cousin, he is part of the Komele group in the Iraqi Kurdish region. And apparently, according to Aida's reporting and or others reporting, the conspiracy theory, the scenario that the government is cooking right now is that this cousin took Masa to outside of Iran, to Iraqi Kurdistan, trained her, and then she came back as an agent of that group and died in a kamikaze mission in order to provoke all these protests. Is that right?
Exactly, that's it. And he denied that. He said this is a big lie and this is a new scenario.
That report is translated and it's being edited as I speak, and it will be on IranWire in a couple of hours from now. But Mr. Zivakalam, Dr. Zivakalam, I wanted to ask you, what do you think about the role of women in the recent protests? And what do you think will happen to these protests as when you talk? I know that you know many of the Iranian officials, former officials, and maybe some of the current officials. What do they say about the role of women? Does it scare them that women have come out in such numbers, that the movement is really led by women? And we had Mr. Vahidi, the Minister of Interior, saying a few weeks ago that the Achilles heel of the regime of the system of the Islamic Republic is women, and it's women who are going to hurt the system. What do you think about the role of women?
Maziar, there are many Iranian analysts and academic, many of my colleagues at Tehran University, that for some time we have felt that the role of the woman in Iran would become the most important role as far as social protest is concerned. We know that, for example, in many societies, including Iran, students, intellectuals, writers, dissidents, ethnic dissidents, they all have acted as a sparkling to the barrel of dynamite. There are many observers who believe that in Iran, in future of Iran, this role would be played by Iranian women, because they have been subjugated to much greater social pressure by the Islamic regime than any other group in Iran. Although it is true that the Kurds and other ethnic minorities, Sunnis, etc., they have been under much greater pressure than other Iranians. But then again, many believe that women in Iran, females in Iran, because of the Islamic regime's attitude towards women, they have been under much greater social force. I mean, if you are a woman in Iran, you want to travel, you have to seek your husband's permission. If there is a court dispute, you would be counted as half. There must be two women, the equivalent to a man. There are many aspects of Iranian female life that discrimination is so vivid and so strong against them in many respects that I'm not surprised really to see women at the forefront of the social protest in Iran.
Okay. Susan, you have a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was hoping to ask both Dr. Ziba Kalam, but also both you and Aida Maziar, just what it is you think has precipitated this dramatic response to this particular case. Obviously, we know that the question of veiling has been a sensitive one for Iranian women for all of the post-revolutionary period. The very first protests that took place after the revolution were on Women's Day in March of 1979, when women came to the streets even then to demand that there should not be compulsory veiling. We have seen over the years other women come to the streets to protest this issue. But what is it about the case of Masa Amini that has struck such a nerve across the country and brought so many people out to the streets and clearly so angry? These are protests. The protesters are chanting "Marg dictator," the death to the dictator. This is a very strenuous and vociferous protest against the regime as a whole. And I wonder if you could reflect a little bit on what are the conditions that brought that about.
Well, when I saw Aida's reporting and when I saw the picture of an innocent young woman in our website, IranWire, and that the fact that she had been killed in the hands of the morality police, that really made me angry. And I don't live in Iran. I don't go through the economic pressure, social pressure, political pressure that an average Iranian is going. We knew that the situation was not tenable, and we knew that everyone, many people around Iran, maybe most people around Iran, were just waiting for a trigger to, as Dr. Ziba Kalam said beautifully, to trigger this box of dynamite to be exploding. And also on top of that, I think we have to understand the Iranians' fascinations with icons and saints. And I think Masa, in her innocence, the way that she was portrayed in those photos, the way that she was not a political figure, that she was not a political agitator. She was just a simple girl from a very small town in Iran who came to Tehran to just change, just to have, for touristic reasons, as Aida said. And the way that she was killed, it was so unjust. But at the same time, she became an icon, and maybe accidental icon for this movement, and triggered this box of dynamite, which is really the Iranian society. And that's why we see such protests. But Dr. Ziba Kalam, what do you think? Why do you think that the death of Masa triggered these protests?
Maziar, you're quite right. You're quite right. Even if there were not an incident of the killing of Masa Amini, or Gina, as the court calls her, I believe something else would have happened, and maybe would have seen this anger erupting again. If you like, I think it's a proper analogy with that Tunisian man who
set himself on fire, yeah.
By the police, set fire to himself, and that ignited the whole Arab Spring, which shook Middle East. In a way, we can ask the same question that he's burning that youth led to that uprising, because there were enough hatred of the authoritarian regime throughout the Arab world. And it acted just like an admission to a barrel of dynamite. I think Masa's unfortunate death acted like that Tunisian youth that burned himself, because we see that it's the hatred, it's the dislike of the Islamic regime, it's the anger, it's the frustration that you see erupting in Iranian cities. Now, obviously could have acted much more wisely, but it is so arrogant that it didn't take that course. The government could have acted more apologetic right from the beginning, but the government acted very proudly, very innocently, as though it hadn't done anything wrong. And it's only the people, it's only the opposition, it's only the people who criticize the government that they are telling lies, that they are making up stories, and they are using Masa's case as an excuse to rise against the government, etc., etc. And I believe that the government could have acted much more wisely and much more shrewdly, and could have actually prevented the eruption.
But it seems that they just don't know, that they don't understand. As we call in Persian, they have jahl murakkab, they have double ignorance, that they do not know that they do not know. And it seems that these new sets of protests really show the chasm between the government on one hand and the majority of Iranians, especially young Iranian, on the other hand, that the government is really run by these aging men who were revolutionaries in the past and who've been living good lives in the past 4 decades, and their ideology is decaying. They're getting richer, they're getting fatter, they're sending their children outside. And on the other hand, you have young Iranians who are outward looking. They want to be in touch with the rest of the world, and they just, I don't think that they can ever reconcile. I have a question for Aida. What do you think about the role of hijab as a fabric in terms of an instrument in the hands of the government to oppress Iranians, especially Iranian women, and on the other hand, as a device for women to liberate themselves, and as when they burn it, and what do you think? What role do you think hijab, a piece of fabric, played in all these protests?
Thank you, Mr. Bahari. I'm going back to the protest, starting from there. The people on this protest, starting being at the street with they screaming woman, life, liberty. So these words, I think it's more important that we should thinking about women, what's happening about women, and then, as you know, such a symbol, icon that explodes this anger in Iranian society. But when I talk to Iranian women inside and outside of Iran in these past days, they told me they thought Masa could be their daughter themselves. I think any Iranian women who are not accepting hijab from last years, they have this experience arresting by this kind of police. I remember that for myself. When they arrest you, you don't have any idea what's going to happen to you. If they are going to have some sexual violence on you, if they're going to kill you, that happened to Masa. They start with touching your body, and then they continue with the verbal violence. Any kind of violence that you can imagine could happen to you. So, in Masa's case, everyone touched this feeling. Everyone has this feeling that could be for someone could end up with death by this kind of police, by this government, without any justice, without any truth. Because of the censor, we know that Iranian government have this censor everywhere on the media. So the family needs to have this, they need to know about the truth. But the hijab, I'm going to give you some example. It's not just about hijab, but the hijab is an important visual thing that we have it. For example, an Iranian in Islamic Republic of Iran law, the women has not any right to divorce. They couldn't decide for divorce. This is the man who have this right. Another thing, for example, when you're married as a woman, you should say yes to the man anytime they want to have sex. So this is, if you said no, they can divorce you. You don't have a right to ride a bicycle. You don't have a right to any basic right that any human being has. So this anger, this suppression on women, this discrimination, it's more than 40 years that they have it by the law, by the government, by the government. So hijab, that means when you are you reach the 7 years old, when you're a girl 7 years old, you should wear hijab. That means that if you don't have this hijab, any other man around the street, around your family, everywhere could have this sexual feeling about you. This is pedophile. This is exactly pedophile, but we have child marriage in Iran by law, authorization by the law. So hijab is a symbol of prison for women. We, from the 7 years old until this maybe, we should wear hijab because they said other men can't control themselves. This is insult for men too, for sure.
The other thing we see in these protests is the resistance of young people, especially women, against the security forces. I remember in 2009, during the Green Movement, what really astonished me and millions of other people was the silence. The fact that millions of people, they marched silently in the streets of Tehran. But I guess those people who were silent in 2009, they are getting older, and the younger generation, they do not want to be silent anymore.
Exactly.
Maziar, I'm going to just jump in on that point, because one of the issues around this current burst of protests that has been commented on in the media, and especially on social media, is that we see perhaps new tactics by demonstrators. We see more fighting back and more deliberate attempts to try to disempower the security forces on the streets and confront them, rather than just try to go out and make a statement and then run away from the repression. So do you think that this is an accurate depiction of what we're seeing? And what does it mean in terms of both the public mood and the prospects for these protests being sustained and having some impact on the stability of the country?
I think you're right, except that I don't think it's a tactic. I think it's a knee-jerk reaction. I think when you've had oppressors for more than 4 decades who've been brutalizing you, brutalizing peaceful protesters, as we saw in 2009, 2017, 2019, then this new generation does not want to react peacefully. I'm not saying that it's right or wrong, but this is what we see on the streets. And maybe it's the violence is futile. I'm not sure. But what we are saying is that the young people, they do not want to remain peaceful. And it has really scared the authorities, I believe. What do you think, Dr. Zibakalam, from your vantage point in Tehran? Do you think that this new wave of resistance, especially young people against the paramilitary Basij, police, and Revolutionary Guards, is a new phase in the movements of the Iranian people?
Let me first, Maziar, respond to what Emily said about hijab. Either it was Emily or
Aida
Ghajar, I don't know which one, saying that the Islamic principles have exerted so much pressure on Iranian women. Well, to some extent, Khanum Ghajar, it is.
It seems as though we may have lost the audio from Dr. Zibakalam.
University, which is solely for women. It is not only for women, but it is also very religiously oriented. And most of the students at Zahra University, they wear the hijab voluntarily. But interestingly enough, yesterday, one of the punishing protests was at that university. Dozens of the Azhar students who were wearing veil were actually shouting and giving a slogan, against hijab and against the government. I mean, that was really surprising. You wouldn't. Why are they protesting? Why should they be protesting? The fact is that what I'm really trying to say is that I agree with you. There are some the pressure because of the hijab, but I believe that the pressure on Iranian the female are much more greater or deeper than simply hijab and Islamic jurisprudence. There are social pressure, political pressure, as well as quite agree with you, as well as religious pressure. But as the question that Maziar, you raised about the outcome of these protests and the possible effect that they might have on Revolutionary Guard and the other Islamic structure, judging by the response and the reaction that we have observed so far from the Islamic authorities, I dare say that it won't change anything. I mean, 2 days ago, the Iranian Supreme Leader talked about he talked with the Revolutionary Guard leaders, etc., and everyone was expecting, everyone was waiting to see what the Supreme Leader would say about these unrest. Not a word. He didn't say anything, as though all these protests, all these demonstrations, all these they all are happening in another country. They are happening in some country in the middle of the Africa or Europe, for that matter. It's nothing to do with Iran. Unfortunately, this is the attitude, Maziar, of the Iranian authorities that nothing has happened, and they would simply go on with the policies that they have been going on during the past 43 years. At least, this is my observation from other protests that we have had during the past 1 or 2 decades.
Great. I think we have some questions from the audience.
Yes, we've been collecting questions via the email address events@brookings.edu and also using the hashtag Masa Amini. And so I'd like to start to pose several of these questions from our listeners to our panelists here today. And I, of course, still have a few of my own questions to build in as well. In particular, I have a question from April Brady, who is a scholar of Iran at the Project for Middle East Democracy here in Washington. And one of her questions is whether we should anticipate that the crackdown will become more severe as Raisi returns from New York. Does he play a particular role given his own past history of human rights abuses? Are we likely to see an even more fierce crackdown once he is back in Tehran?
Well, I don't think that the president has to do anything with the security forces. The supreme leader of Iran is the supreme commander of the security forces. And Ebrahim Raisi has proven himself to be quite inefficient, inept, and really out of depth. So I don't think whether he's in Tehran, Jakarta, or New York would matter whatsoever. It's the Supreme Security Council that is making decision about these matters, and at the end of the day, it's the Supreme Leader of Iran who commands the security forces.
Let me turn to another question from John Sotos, sent to our email address. Someone who knows Iran quite well. And what he asked is, we've seen sporadic eruptions of protests. I was in Iran way back in 1999 when students came to the streets. Obviously, Maziar, you were arrested when you were covering the unrest that erupted after the 2009 election. There have been spasms of protests that have captivated the world and that have created a sense of clear dissatisfaction with the regime. And yet each time the regime has managed to suppress them with increasing violence. And we don't necessarily see that there is a kind of sustained movement. And so what John Sotos asked is whether there are any new developments, new protest tactics, grassroots organizing, cross-class cooperation in these latest protests. Do we see that the protests that we're seeing this time may be gaining strength or efficacy in really challenging the regime in a way that would have long-term implications?
I can give you my answer, but I'd love to hear what Aida and Dr. Zibakalam have to say about this as well. I think one of the Islamic Republic of Iran is one of the luckiest governments in the world because it does not have a viable opposition. If there was a viable, cohesive opposition at the moment, it would lead these protests much better. They would have maybe the same slogans all around Iran, and they would propose an alternative to this government. Unfortunately, for the past 4 decades, the Iranian opposition, they've been fighting amongst themselves, and they have been their own worst enemies. But Dr. Zibakalam, what do you think about the forces?
I quite agree with you, Maziar, that we have no viable, we have no real opposition, unfortunately. Even though there is such a widespread dissatisfaction against the Islamic regime, you would have thought that there must be a very, very organized and strong position, but it isn't, neither inside the country nor outside the country. Given the fact that we have over 7 million Iranian expatriates living in the United States and in Europe, despite that huge number, you don't see any real and pragmatic opposition, organized opposition outside Iran. Perhaps one of the reasons is that the opposition has always been thinking of overthrowing the Islamic regime, and because their sole objective is to overthrow the Islamic regime rather than trying to reform. I think that's one of the reasons. And recently, after the Rouhani's government, this belief that we must overthrow the Islamic regime, and the only real salvation for Iran is the overthrow of the Islamic regime. Unfortunately, it has become much more resonant, much more powerful amongst the Iranian, both inside the country and outside. That idea that there is only one solution, and that's the overthrow of the Islamic regime, I think that has prevented from opposition that can use, for example, the present unrest and plan the realistic and practical ways of actually combating the Islamic regime.
Yeah, overthrowing into what? That's been the question. What do you think, Aida? What do you think about the Iranian opposition? You've been living outside of Iran for the past 13 years.
Yeah, I'm agree with you that we don't have any powerful opposition group can lead the protest and can organize this anger, these people, this young generation who are on the street facing the police. But maybe I can just add something on this subject that. I'm not a political activist, I'm a journalist. So as a journalist who works on the human rights domain, maybe I just thinking about the other countries, other governments who are dealing with the Islamic Republic of Iran. Yeah, I know that this is a political and this is an economical issue that they are going to dealing with that. All the media are talking about the nuclear dialogue and yes, we know that, but the other government, they are dealing and having dialogue with this kind of regime, political regime. So maybe as a human rights community on each country, civil society on each country, we can ask the government, we can ask the political regime in any country that we are, that where is the human rights in their dialogue. Mr. Macron, for example, president of France, they told Iranian journalists that he said, yes, we have a discussion about human rights, women's rights with Mr. Raisi, president of Iran, but that's it. He didn't give us any details. I think this is the important thing because the Iranian people, they are alone. They are themselves. They have no one's with them. There is no leader for them. So maybe this can help them talking about the human rights and not closing our eyes on Iranian people. And maybe something else that in these days we are really fearing, we are scaring about, we thinking about the internet. We have this kind of government, this kind of political regime can shut down the internet, and we don't know what's going to happen then, because on this story on November 2019, they shutting down in the internet for 3 days, and we confirm on IranWire that we spoke with the family more than 350
online, on the landline. Yeah. So I'm not sure, Susan, if Elon Musk is a fan of Brookings or not, but Elon, if you're watching this program, if you're listening, please do something. And Iran, you might be the most popular person in Iran at the moment, because that is the fear in Iran. Joking aside, is that the government is shutting down the internet. They're narrowing the bandwidth in order to be able to have another set of killings, even worse than what we had 4 years ago.
I wanted to press on this point just as we move toward the end of our hour. Obviously, this question of what the international community does at times of tensions within Iran, specifically how the international community can help. We know back in 2009, in fact, someone in the State Department reached out to Twitter to make sure that Twitter didn't do a sort of ordinary reboot that would have taken that system offline and made it inaccessible to Iranians. There has been talk about whether there are mechanisms that the United States or other governments can utilize to try to ensure that Iranians do have access to the internet. I know that's a subject of a lot of conversation here. We have seen statements from the podium at the State Department, Ned Price, as well as from the U.S. National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan. But of course, all of this is happening while the world's leaders have been assembled in New York, and Raisi, who has a particularly gruesome track record of his own over the course of his career in the Islamic Republic, has had meetings with a number of other heads of state, and it isn't very clear that this issue has been raised or put in a very prominent place. So, you've already made the pitch to Elon Musk. What is it that you would say to President Biden? What is it that you would say to President Macron, others around the world, about how they should be speaking and dealing, and what role the leaders of the world can play in helping those who are on the streets today to have their voices heard?
First of all, I would thank President Biden for mentioning Iranian women in his speech yesterday at the UN. And I think the best way to help Iranian people at the moment is to make an effort in order to have free internet, whether it's a satellite internet or another kind of internet inside Iran, so we can have free flow of information within Iran, between Iran and the outside world, and the outside world and inside Iran. And if we have that, the European community, the United States, other countries, they do not have to worry about that much anymore, because if we have free flow of information inside Iran, people can mobilize themselves, they can inform each other, they can be in touch with the rest of the world, they can share news, they can gather news. And that is the most, I think, the basic priority at the moment for the world community. So think about, and that's why we see after Masa Amini these days, Elon Musk might be the second individual whose name is mentioned in the Iranian cybersphere. I think Dr. Ziba Kalam, what do you think? What do you think that the international community can do for Iran?
Well, first of all, I'm not so sure if this is a proper idea that is circulating amongst many Iranians inside and outside the country, that others must help us, must do something about human rights in Iran. The Americans must do something about the human rights in Iran. Europeans must do something about the human rights in Iran. I don't know. I believe that this is not the right attitude. I don't think Russian opposition to Mr. Putin have such an idea, or the Chinese, the dissident have such an idea. And obviously, we must raise the human rights issue and the fact that we have political prisoners, etc., with the European leaders, with American leaders, and ask them to put pressure on the Iranian government as far as human rights is concerned. Or, for example, if they can, help with the satellite internet, etc., but to demand and to look upon the Westerner as though they should have done something, and they have a duty to help us, and why don't they help us? I think that's it's rather too much.
Yeah. And Aida, what do you think? If you had a session with President Biden, what would you tell him?
Give us the internet, please. We need it. We need the internet. We need to have access to Iran. The Iranian people need to access to the free world. They are like a prisoner on Iran. Just give us internet, please. Just that.
Well, I want to express my deep gratitude to all of our participants here in this discussion, to Dr. Sadek Ziba Kalam, who joined us by telephone from Tehran, to Maziar Bahari, who has created this platform, IranWire, that has enabled Iranian journalists, both within the country and outside the country, to continue to share the news of Iran with Iranians and with the wider world. And especially to Aida Ghajar, who is one of those responsible for ensuring that the story of Gina, the story of Masa Amini, has been heard by so many people around the world. We will continue to follow your reporting. We're grateful for all that you shared here today, and we look forward to continuing the conversation on all the issues that concern Iran. I'm especially grateful, and I look forward to speaking with you again soon. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks very much.